Now, we're going to talk about Silicon Valley as a community. We've talked about the economy, certainly an important subject, but the economy doesn't tell you everything. In fact, things about like gross national product, things like domestic product, things like productivity measures, they tell you one thing, but they might not be telling you important things. They might not be telling you how people are feeling. They're not telling you about wellness. They're not telling you about job satisfaction. They're not telling you about actual living circumstances. And so those are very important, and they're important in the way that Rachel, my colleague, was discussing this morning. So now we'll talk about this place where we live and what it's like to live here and how the people are faring. So let's get right to it. I'd like to start by just talking about our overall well-being. Here's a chart that shows you the state of anxiety and depression that is a part of our reality in Silicon Valley. Now, it shouldn't surprise anybody to learn that during those years of the pandemic, those harrowing years where there was so much uncertainty, so much upheaval, well, no surprise. People who self-reported themselves as experiencing either anxiety or depression actually ticked up significantly. And the purple line is all adults, but isn't it also troubling to see that young adults are experiencing anxiety or depression at higher rates than the rest of the population? Now, fortunately, that is starting to come down as we normalize from the pandemic. Nevertheless, how does it feel to know that 1 out of 5 people are grappling with these issues? It's real, and this is one thing that we have to think about as a community. One measure of wellness, not the only measure, not even the most important measure, but one measure would be income, right? Income is a key to many things. So we thought we should start off by talking about Silicon Valley's earners and how that's going. And we also want to wrap our heads around some of the gaps that continue to distinguish our region. Well, the green stack is the average annual earnings in Silicon Valley. I just want to point out, first of all, that the number is $189,000. That's the average annual earnings. That's average, $189,000. Let's put that in perspective. The United States average is less than $100,000. It's actually around 70. So in Silicon Valley, the average annual earnings more than double, far more than double, approaching triple the national average. But, just like Rachel told us this morning, average is a bogus measure. It's actually sort of meaningless because we have so many high earners in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has 60 billionaires. We have about 86,000 millionaire households. That's not the value of their house, that's the value of their liquid cash. And so this is a valley of some people that are doing extremely well, but it's also a valley of people who are doing less well or even struggling to get by. So averages really aren't a very meaningful way to talk about what's happening in a place. That's why we're always interested to find other income measures as well. And one that we think is more telling is median household income. This is not single earners, this is the entire household. And what does that look like? Well, there's some good news. It's been steadily rising. Median household income has been rising ever since the end of the epic recession. That's a good trend. It fell off during the pandemic, but it climbed again in the past calendar year. Didn't climb by much. In fact, when you adjust for inflation, it's pretty much just at a plateau. But that's how we should understand what's happening in Silicon Valley right now. It's income growth as households, but barely keeping pace with inflation. And we've been hammered by inflation in the past 3 years. Seems to be leveling out as 2023 came to a close. This is another measure, it's per capita income, again, not our favorite, but there are some telling things about it, especially when you look at it by by race and ethnicity. And so this chart is telling us that first it's telling us some good news. It's telling us that per capita income is going up. It's been steadily increasing over the past 12 years. Okay, that's good news. But the chart is also telling us that there are some real disparities here by race. So, for example, for white members of the community, that per capita is above 100,000. For Black or African American members of our community, it's significantly below that. It's actually half of that. That's a whopping disparity, and it makes it impossible for any of us to feel good about what's happening in Silicon Valley right now. It's even more starkly dramatic for Hispanic or Latino households. There it is at $36,000 a year. Now, understand, per capita it's a particular measure, and these are household. I'm sorry, no, this is per capita, but. In a lot of households, there are multiple generations, and so that affects these numbers. This is what it looks like when we adjust for inflation, and what it's showing you is the disparity of the growth rate. So, per capita income growing 41% for Asian members of our community, not growing nearly as fast for Hispanic or Latino or for our Black and African American members of our community. Rachel talked about the Gini coefficient this morning, so I don't need to go into great detail, but just a quick reminder. The Gini coefficient has advantages and disadvantages. But it can be a useful way of looking at a population. So the Gini coefficient says it hits 100 if one person is holding all the wealth. Okay? So 100 means one person has all the wealth. 0 means all of the wealth is held equally. So that's how that works. Let me show you our Gini coefficient. By the way, the U.S. is at 55. On that standard, 55. That's economists will tell you that's in the normal range. Okay, this is what's been happening in Silicon Valley. This is stark and dramatic. In the 80s, our Gini was around in the 40s. Over the past 40 years, we have outpaced every other part of the country, and we're now up there above 80. 80. That's amazing. This is a stunning finding. So if you're jotting down headlines, this is one. Developmental economists, people who study growing economies or troubled economies or nations that are in political transitions, they will tell you that anything above 70 is considered politically unstable. Blood in the streets kind of instability. And so this is one way to be understanding what's happening in Silicon Valley. Okay, so that's stark and dramatic. Now here's a chart that visually is hard to understand. And so I'm just going to make it very simple. It's just laying out our wealth inequality by household and then by the percentage of liquid wealth. So we mentioned earlier, Silicon Valley, 60 billionaires, many thousands upon thousands of millionaire households in terms of their liquid wealth. It happens to be the case that the top 10 members of our society, the billionaires, these are multi-billionaires, they account for almost 50% of the wealth, just 10 people. That's how disparate the measure is. But it's even more dramatic than that. I'll just put it into plain English for you. In Silicon Valley, households that are in the top 10%, just that top decile, they hold 70% of all of the wealth. That's what Silicon Valley looks like. Then, if you take all of the households in the bottom half, they hold 1% of the wealth. So there's our disparities. I'm just trying to put that in plain English for you. Now, what if all the wealth in Silicon Valley were equally distributed? And so here we're talking about household wealth, we're talking about real estate as well. So if you took all of the wealth in Silicon Valley and you decided you wanted to put it at 0 on the Gini coefficient, in other words, every household had the same amount of money, The number would be $2 million per household. That would be the number. So just understand, Silicon Valley has the nation's biggest wealth gaps and the nation's biggest income gaps. And then they stratify even more dramatically by race. That's the place that we're living in. So that's statement number one. Statement number two, the pace at which those gaps are widening is increasing with each passing year. This trend is not being interrupted in any way. So we need to understand that about our region. All right, so not surprising, there's actual poverty in Silicon Valley and a substantial amount of it. This is a chart that's explaining that that 7% of our households are living in poverty. And we can show you that this is the share of children who are living in poverty. It's pretty sobering to know that in Silicon Valley, 1 out of 14 children are living in poverty. But guess what? This is me building on something really important that Rachel said, because data and statistics can be used to tell lies. They can be used to shade the truth or to put a certain spin on it. Here's one example of that. This poverty standard is the federal government's standard, and it was developed decades ago and is still in use. It is the tool that they're using to guide federal policy as it relates to poverty. But here in Silicon Valley, we've decided that this is a useless standard. It doesn't serve our region at all because it doesn't take into account local conditions, such as local prices for the standard grocery basket of commodities, but it also doesn't factor in the cost of real estate. And you remember in the first briefing we talked about how the cost is staggering, highest in the nation. So we've decided that we're not going to use the federal standard in the Silicon Valley Index. We're also going to use something that was invented not in the halls of government, but in the halls of academia. And we think that's far more useful. And it's called the Self-Sufficiency Standard. It was developed by a team of researchers at the University of Washington. And we think it's far more helpful. It does take into account the local characteristics, including our real estate and our cost of living. So when we use that standard, we discover that 30% of households in Silicon Valley are not self-sufficient. That means that they require some form of assistance in able to survive. And that assistance is coming from friends, from family, from a faith community, or from a government program. So that number is approaching a third. About a third of households in Silicon Valley not self-sufficient. This is the percentage of children. And I wanted to highlight this. Households that are not self-sufficient also correlate with household size. In other words, the number of children in those households. And so it turns out that the number of children that are living in households that are not self-sufficient, that percentage is 37. So understand that about a third of our children are not thriving. Now, if we were to take that same population, insufficient, non-sufficient households, and then look at their other characteristics, such as their race or ethnicity or their educational attainment, and this is what we learn. Actually, Hispanic or Latino households, 54% of them are not self-sufficient. If you have less than a high school diploma, then that number turns out to be 74% or more are not self-sufficient. If there are children in the household, well, then it's approaching 79%. If limited ability to speak English, then it's approaching 70% of those households not self-sufficient. So these are some things we should understand. Childcare in Silicon Valley is a huge cost driver. We didn't understand this until more recently. Most people, economists, others, think of your major costs as housing, number one, and then transportation, fuel, and then food. Those are the ones that are most ordinarily measured. But in Silicon Valley, the cost of childcare has been growing exponentially since the onset of the century. This is a rate, you can see, it's a rate that far outpaces inflation. Childcare used to be organized a little differently. There were a lot of public programs or even programs that were made widely available, and the industry has evolved somewhat to be more market-based, and so that's very much what's driving these trends to the point where today childcare is it's really truly expensive, and it becomes one of the most important cost drivers, more than even housing, if you can believe that. So we need to understand that. Oh yeah, here it is. Relative to the consumer price index, relative to inflation. This is a major development for our region. Now, we have a huge swath of households that are what we call food insecure. A better way to say that is hungry. Our households are hungry. So let me help you understand this chart. Visually, it's a lot to take in. So let me try and explain. The green segment are households that are living below the poverty line, and that's the federal standard that I just dumped at. So there they are, and of course those households they qualify for federal programs, food stamps and other federal programs. Okay, that's the green. Then the orange segment, that's the segment of our population that are living above the poverty line, but below what we said was self-sufficiency. And so they qualify for certain programs. That's good news, CalFresh, for example, but they don't qualify for others. So that's the orange segment. Okay, now here is the blue, the light blue. This is people who may be meeting self-sufficiency standards, but just barely. They're on the edge. And their income level disqualifies them for the federal programs and for certain state programs. They do remain eligible for second harvest assistance. Okay, finally, the purple. This is the most vexing of all. They're below the self-sufficiency standard, and so these are struggling households, but they don't qualify for any of the programs. Don't qualify because their income level is sufficiently high. So this is a major challenge that we wanted to highlight for Silicon Valley as a community. So if you look at it now visually, you have the lightly colored yellow. That's about half the population. But the other half of the population is in real pain, and it's pain that's not going to be solved by perfunctory approaches through the programs that we have in place. That's what we want you to understand about that. Now, this is quite remarkable. This is the food assistance that is being made available. And so green indicates the government programs. And of course, they ratcheted up during the pandemic. That was the will of this nation, and we made that possible. But they are now tapering as the pandemic is behind us. Meanwhile, enormous growth in private programs funded through nonprofits or through charitable donations, and that includes here in Silicon Valley, Second Harvest. And it's amazing to see that during the pandemic, Second Harvest was providing almost half of all the food assistance, practically more than the government programs. Over that 4-year period, Second Harvest, because of the generosity of donors, including the private sector, I think applause is appropriate, absolutely. Second Harvest, over that 4-year period, provided 400 million meals. I mean, this is absolutely stunning and remarkable. So we wanted to pose a question before we bring our first subject matter expert up here, and this is the question. So pandemic-era food programs have been scaled back, but is that okay? Because is there enough to make up the difference through other federal programs or from the private contributions? That's the question that we want you to ponder, and we're going to get some expertise on that question. So I would now like you to meet none other than the executive director of the Second Harvest Silicon Valley. She's Leslie Bacho. Leslie, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Russ.
Thank you. You on like that? Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want you to know that I consider Leslie to be a Silicon Valley hero. And we're really grateful not only for your work, for the way that you do your work, but also today that you would share your expertise with us. So thank you for that. Well, say a word about this. We're voting. People have feelings, but they might not be fully informed. So now, inform us. What is the state?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say something I'm really struck by today, listening to your first presentation this morning, was just that experience of so much wealth being generated during the pandemic. So many, even though there have been layoffs, net job positive. You said for the tech community, really the pandemic was a bonanza. And just how starkly different that was than for all of us who are working in the social sector, and just for all of our clients for whom the pandemic was really financially devastating.
It's like we're two valleys.
Truly, and I really appreciate you and Rachel doing such a great job illustrating that growing income inequality. And I just wanted to add a little color to that, because what we saw during the pandemic was that low-wage workers were really so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and these were households that often didn't have a lot of savings. And what we saw was, as soon as shelter-in-place went into effect, people started losing their jobs.
Yeah. I want to insert something.
Yeah.
Just another factoid for you. There are 20,000 households that we know of in Silicon Valley that are unbanked. That means they don't have a bank account. 20,000 households, no bank account. That means what cash they're holding, it's underneath the pillow at night. So just more context for what you're saying.
That's right. So many of these low-wage households really financially vulnerable, and that's when, in a matter of months, we started to see the need for our services double. We started serving 500,000 people a month. And what we also saw during that time is many of those households that did have savings, maybe folks that had been saving up for years to send their kids to college or maybe to save up for a bigger apartment, they also had to wipe out all of those savings. So people are just in a much more financially fragile situation. We kind of saw the need decline some, and then as soon as inflation hit, as soon as we saw food and fuel prices really go up, and for low-income households, that's a huge part of your budget, we started to see the need for our services increase again. And a lot of those government pandemic-era benefits started to go away, and so now we are back up to serving 500,000 people a month. And something we do consistently is survey our clients just to better understand what's going on in their households. And one thing we've seen is that 60% of people say they have less than $100 in savings. So if you could just imagine the economic vulnerability of that, that is just one, car breakdown, one unexpected medical bill away from not being able to meet your basic needs. What you're kind of alluding to, Russ, is today the challenge is all of those government benefits that have gone away from individuals have also gone away for those nonprofits that are serving the community, and we're also seeing a lot less financial support. We had so many people jump in and help during the pandemic, which was amazing, which is how we were able to double.
Yes.
And even though we're raising 60% more money today than we were then, we're serving 100% more people.
Can I just say,
it just doesn't work.
During the pandemic, it was amazing. People came out of the woodwork to help. It was a beautiful thing to see. It was inspiring. But I mean, making facilities available, making parking lots available for distribution
centers.
That's
right. Park and Rec started pitching in because they're
making empty warehouses available. Anyway, all of this stuff. But all of that has tapered now, and you're left as you were, except the need is still ratcheting upward.
That's right. And we've just, this whole safety net that we have more than 400 nonprofit partners that do this work with us. And, like you say, everybody really stepped up. And we are still supporting the same number of people coming for food assistance every day, 500,000 households, 500,000 people, and with a lot fewer resources, which really isn't sustainable. So I appreciate you just illustrating how dramatic that income inequality is. Good. And if people take away one thing from today, we are now serving 1 in 6 people here in Silicon Valley. Just like you said, the need is closer to 1 in 4 people who need assistance. And so that is not just some of us, that is many of us. And really, it impacts all of us if we want this to be a place where people can really thrive.
Great. Hunger in Silicon Valley is not a food problem, is it?
That's right.
What is it?
That's right. I mean, hunger is not due to scarcity in this country. We have plenty of food to go around. It is really due to poverty. And at Second Harvest, we are really looking at, we know we have to continue to meet this very immediate, very foundational need. Food is so foundational for all of us to be able to thrive, for long-term health outcomes, to be able to concentrate in school, but we're also looking at how we can make progress on those root causes of hunger. So things like income supports. The government did do some good things during the pandemic, like the child tax credit that literally have child poverty. We're looking at things like that. We are also looking at housing. I mean, just like you've illustrated very well, that is the biggest reason people need food assistance is usually due to housing and the high cost of housing, and they have to pay their rent, and they have little money left over to afford food. We're also looking at things like environmental justice. Our most under-resourced communities are also more vulnerable to climate change, to air and water pollution, and also to not having access to nutritious food. And it is going to take those kinds of big system changes to really make a difference.
Okay, so let's pretend that we have made you queen of Silicon Valley. What's your first step? What's the first thing you would do?
Ooh, that's a good question, Russ. I mean, again, it will take all of us to make these changes, and things like wages, things like everyone having affordable housing, really looking at how we can make this a valley where everybody can afford to live. And it does take not just public investment. I mean, all of our governments right now, they're facing the same budget challenges we are. It really will also take private investment. And when you look at that wealth generation chart, again, we are not seeing it in the nonprofit community right now. We really need more support to make this a place where everybody can thrive.
Leslie Bacho, Second Harvest, Silicon Valley. Thank you so much. Let's keep talking about people, how people are doing in Silicon Valley. And of course, education is a key indicator, not only an indicator, but a value. It's a value of this society. We value education. We tend to be highly educated. We see it as a pathway forward. So let's examine how we're doing on the education front. Tons of indicators are published in the index. We recommend it to your reading. I won't pull them all up. I just pull a couple. This shows you 8th grade math proficiency. Students have to be tested in 8th grade. They're tested statewide. And it seems like we lost ground. We lost ground over the pandemic. And so this chart is showing you that, yeah, sure enough, we did. And so we're going to have to make our way back there as we work with our children in the classrooms of the middle schools across the region. But right now, less than 50% of our 8th graders are actually proficient where they're technically supposed to be in 8th grade, and that trend's going the wrong way. But then, of course, this is even more troubling. We see that there are these real disparities by race. So when we look at the 8th grade standard again, it turns out that our Asian population is meeting that standard at a higher rate, even though it fell. It actually fell over the course of the pandemic. White members of our society are meeting that standard by about 63%. But our Filipino members of our society, less. Native Islanders, significantly less. And then as we look at the Black or African American members of our community, that rate is now around 19%. Hispanic or Latino members of our community, it's around 18%. So there's work to be done here. This represents a really big agenda. This is a chart that we realize is visually difficult to wrap your head around, but it's another indicator that shows this time another standardized thing, which is the University of California entrance requirements and the Cal State University entrance requirements. And the question here is, are our graduating high school kids meeting those standards so that they can be admitted to our university system. So Asians are meeting them at the highest rate. More than 80% of Asians are admissible to the UC system. Fewer white members of our community, but above 70%. And then we see the drop-off that I've been describing. So in other words, there's consistency from 8th grade with the math standards, still later in 12th grade. With the UC standards, we still see the same disparities. High school is not fixing it, in other words, even though our high school teachers in the system is so extremely hardworking. So for African Americans, our African American members actually lost ground over the last couple of years. Our Hispanic or Latino members have also lost ground there over the past couple of years. The percent that are meeting it is around 30%. So again, we continue to report disparities. There was always the hope that educational attainment, including especially college, would be a leveler. That's the theory, isn't it? You get that bachelor's degree, you get that college degree, and you can enter into society and enter into the workforce and be playing on that level playing field. So is that actually the case? That's the question we wanted to pose. We found that it's actually not the case. This chart is explaining that if you are a white member of our community and you have a bachelor's degree, you are making a salary of around $160,000. If you are a Hispanic or Latino member of our community, you also have your bachelor's degree. You're making around $80,000, 82-something thousand dollars. In other words, almost a 50% disparity, almost half the amount of equally educated counterparts. So something is wrong with this picture. We just want to say that very clearly. And same with the other races and ethnicities. Then there's also been the hope in Silicon Valley that technology and innovation and the companies that our entrepreneurs are creating, the hope is that that would be a ladder for people to experience mobility upward. So we've tried to ask that question as well, and we're asking it the best. We're gathering the data the best that we can, and the data is imperfect, by which I mean not comprehensive, not thoroughly systematic, but to the best of our ability through self-reporting and others. This is what the tech sector looks like. The question we're asking here is, first, what race or ethnicity are you? And then, what is the percentage in tech that are holding technical roles, leadership roles? So let me just start with the white population. So our white population represents around 30% of the workforce. Okay, that's 30% of our entire workforce are white members of our community. But in tech, they are holding close to 60% of the leadership roles, so a far greater percentage than their share of the population. And then in terms of technical roles, they're holding around 46, 47% of those technical roles. Okay, let's compare that to to the Hispanic or Latino members of our community. They constitute about 25% of the working population, but at our tech companies, these are the largest companies in this sample, less than 10% of the technical roles and around 8 or 9% of the leadership roles. And then it's even more dramatic with Black or African American members of our community. So, so far, tech doesn't seem to be that ladder that a lot of people have been hoping it could become, but there's work to do, there's more to play out. So that's a roundup of community. We warmly recommend the other community indicators in there. We hope you avail yourselves of all of this. And by the way, this index is supposed to be yours. It's supposed to be your tool. You're supposed to use it year-round. It's supposed to inform the decision-making that you are doing. And we hope you understand that it doesn't exist only in the book or in the PDF, but also on this dynamic online website, SiliconValleyIndicators.org. We're going to change gears now, and for the remainder of this briefing, we're going to talk about Silicon Valley and our relationship to the health of the planet. So I'd like to say something about those things: sustainability, the state of our environment, which also clearly a premier issue for us. Well, I'd like to put a number in front of you. Here it is, 52 billion. That is the number of tons of greenhouse gases that we emit, that the world, that the planet is emitting into the atmosphere on an annual basis. That's our inventory, okay? 52 billion. That's the number. That's where the world stands right now. 52 billion tons of greenhouse gases. I'd like to show you another number. 0. That's where we have to go. If we're serious. I mean, if we're serious, then we need to reduce our greenhouse gases to 0. And we need to be using alternative forms of energy. I think most of us would agree that's the proposition. That's what we need to be doing. So the question is, are we headed in that direction? I am not going to speak to the state of the world. That's not our charter, not our purview. It's not why you're here. But I will speak to how Silicon Valley is doing. So let's look at Silicon Valley's inventory of greenhouse gases. It's a complicated subject. We understand that. Climate scientists and others who study this, they will study it with tremendous granularity, which we respect and admire. But I'm just going to simplify for today's discussion purposes. There are 4 major sources of greenhouse gases that we are emitting in Silicon Valley. They emanate from transportation, so mostly the cars and the trucks that we drive. They emanate from solid waste. They emanate from our use of natural gas, and then finally there's output from electricity. So this chart is showing you what those shares are, and the biggest share by far is transportation. That's the biggest sector that's contributing to the greenhouse gas problem in Silicon Valley. But solid waste less so, natural gas, and then followed by electricity, basically in that order. Now there's some good news. By the way, we measure the world in billions of tons, but in Silicon Valley we measure ourselves in millions, in terms of millions of metric tons. And so that's what we're looking at. In 2015, we topped out at around 18 million metric tons, and that number's going down. So that's good news. We can look at this and we can feel like we're going in the right direction. Whether the pace is fast enough is an entirely different question, but directionally, there's some good news in this chart. And for the last year that we have measurement, we broke, again, our records, and we can feel good about that. This, by the way, is our change on a percentage basis. So there's our carbon emissions, and over that 3-year period, they fell by 11%. Good for us. And our per capita emissions also down by a corresponding percent, close anyway, 8%. So that's what we look like. Now, you might wonder what's driving that. Why are we directionally positive? Well, a big part of that, clearly, is that we're converting over to electrics. A lot of us in Silicon Valley are now driving electric vehicles or hybrids, plug-in hybrids. And this chart shows you the progress that we're making on the infrastructure that's going to have to be in place. And that infrastructure is growing, and it's growing every day. We really are building out. And we used to have the highest share of California. The dotted line shows you that our share is going down. Now, actually, that's good news. That means that the rest of the state is catching up. They're getting the Silicon Valley vision. They're converting to electrics like we did. We were early adopters. We can say that in Silicon Valley. Now the rest of the state catching up to us, so that's something. This shows our adoption rates. They're approaching 175,000 electric vehicles out on the road, in Silicon Valley as of 2022. And again, the share is coming down, but that's because people are catching up. But we were the trendsetter in this state and, of course, in the nation, as we typically have been. So you might be curious, what kind of cars are we driving? And if you think you see Teslas everywhere you turn, you're right. You're right. Look at that. Tesla has 57% of the EV market in Silicon Valley, and then the rest you can see it's the Bolt, it's the Bolt and the Volt, and there's Spark in there, and all of these others. But in Silicon Valley, at least, Elon Musk and his team and his product has really caught on. A equally important question isn't the light vehicles that people typically drive. It's also, are we converting trucks and buses into heavy-duty vehicles? And we've been doing that, especially in this county. We've got 75 buses on the road that are fully electric. Work to be done, though, and this is the harder problem. I mean, they're all hard problems, but converting our heavy-duty fleet is going to take some more concerted effort. Well, here's our electricity consumption, and it's going up. But you could say that's good news. That's actually good news. This is what you want. You want to see us adopting patterns that favor electricity, so long as the source of that electricity is a clean, renewable source. So this is a very important question. How are we doing? We'll look at this. Look at us in 2021, look at us in 2019. The green area of those vertical bars is telling you that it's coming from solar, it's coming from large water plants, it's coming from wind. We even have a portion of nuclear. And that's how we roll in Silicon Valley. So for the most part, we're using clean sources. By the way, the advent of the consumer choice agencies in Silicon Valley and in the Greater Peninsula has been a significant development. Well, I see some of them are here. They're right here. Yeah. So that's significant. But look, when you compare us to the rest of the United States, which is still using a significant percentage of its energy that is not from a clean source, sources such as coal. So we can feel good about the trend. We can certainly feel good about the direction. Whether it's at a rate that is sufficient is still an entirely different proposition. Now, look at what we're doing on solar. Look at that curve. That is all kinds of solar installations going into our region. That's something that I think we can feel good about. This, too, is state leading, is certainly nation leading. And the chart is also showing you that we're doing a whole bunch of solar storage. Then, not surprisingly, our air seems to be getting cleaner. So when you look at this chart, what you're seeing are the unhealthy air days. And way back at the turn of this century, we used to have a lot of those. They call them spare the air days. You're familiar, right? The bulletin would go out, and we would be encouraged to stay home, not to drive. And the number of those days has been declining as our air becomes more clean. Now, who should we congratulate for that? Probably not ourselves. In actuality, it's because of strident regulation that has shut down most of our large emitters. And so there's your result. Then we see the unhealthy air days climbing, but you know what that was? That was wildfires. In other words, a clear effect of the warming of the planet are these untamed wildfires that are happening with increasing frequency. And so there it is. You remember in 2020, darkness at noon? It was surreal. That's what you're seeing in the chart. Fortunately, the past 3 years, we haven't had any of those, knock on wood. And we've had another good rain year, and so we can be hopeful. But that's what our air picture looks like. Now, a big contributor to our air picture is if we're driving less. So the pandemic set in, and we stopped driving. We stayed home, and that did a world of good for our emissions. And now that the pandemic's behind, will people continue those patterns, or will we just revert to our old pattern? In other words, will we keep using transit? Will we keep using public transit options? Well, the answer to that question is no, we're not. This is Caltrain. This is Caltrain ridership. Caltrain is fabulous service. I love riding Caltrain. It's a railroad we can be proud of. It's electrifying. And by that, I don't mean the rider experience, which is also electrifying. I mean, they're installing electricity, so these trains will be utterly clean. But since the pandemic, we've decided we're not going to ride anymore. And look at that, they have fallen off the cliff, and so this is introducing a staggering public policy problem for our leaders and decision makers. What are we going to do about this? Should we continue to fund these systems if nobody is riding them? This at a time when they already have undertaken major capital expansion projects. Let me show you BART. We have the same conundrum. This is what's happening in the rest of the country. The chart is showing you that in New York, in LA, and Boston, people are back on the subway. And they're back on these rail systems. They're back to about 70% of where they were with pre-COVID. But here in the Bay Area, BART is less than 40% of its previous ridership. They too facing a fiscal cliff. They're operating right now with subsidies, but the question is, should those continue indefinitely? Our representatives have some very hard and important choices to be making over the coming year and the years beyond. We have water is also a scarce resource. They say water is the next oil. I subscribe to that. Our usage of water is going to become a premier issue, especially as drought continues to be a part of our reality. Well, there's good news here, you could say. We're using water more efficiently. And that trend is continued for a good 20-year period with some fluctuation. But again, directionally positive. We're having shorter showers. We're using implements that filter and preserve the water in important ways. We're making conversions to our yards. All of those things are happening, but it won't be enough. There has to be more to come. So let's ask a question before we bring up our final subject matter expert. The question is, what do we need to be doing? And it's kind of a silly question. I concede. It's really a silly question. We have to be doing all of those things. We know that. We have to be doing all of those things. But we want to know the thing that you're most comfortable with. So choose one. Choose the one that you think should be top priority or that we should tackle first of all. And let's see what that looks like across all of our devices. I would like you to meet our next subject matter expert. She is the person who is on the front lines for these issues. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Santa Clara County. Please meet Jasneet Sharma. Jasneet, thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
You can use that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi. And thank you for giving me kind of a title elevation, making a Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm just the director for the Office of Sustainability, so let me just level set some things there.
We think of you as the czar and the guru. That's what we think of you.
Thank you so much.
That's how we regard you. But how are we doing? I want to ask.
Yeah. So a couple of things I think I wanted to point out as you were sharing the data as well is I think a lot of the way in which the data is being tracked is good. You showed a lot of equity-related data as well and metrics and implications. Yes. But when I was looking at more so the data related to EVs and how solar is being added in as well.
Equity is at play.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely at play. Tell us more.
Absolutely. So we're not seeing the benefits of all these trickling down to the population groups that you were speaking to earlier. We're not seeing the rate of adoption of EV among our low-income households, among our vulnerable populations. They're not adding solar. They're not getting the benefits because they're often renters. They live in multifamily housing. So they don't have access to all of these resources that we all do. So I think it's important for us to also start tracking or including equity in some of these metrics. We try to do it also geospatially to really see where are those populations and where we really need to target some of our work as well. So I think that would be my biggest recommendation is in some of these metrics, not all, but I think some of the important ones, digging a little deeper as well.
Tell us, if you had to grade Silicon Valley so far, how are we doing?
Well, let me, we're doing good, kind of, right? And I think you just alluded, we haven't had wildfire for 3 years. We've been fortunate. What we are really seeing is what we're calling now boom and busts. When you see these rivers, these atmospheric rivers, pineapple expresses, these things didn't exist in our vocabulary a while back. These are new things. To see a 1,000-year storm in San Diego, unheard of. We didn't even know what a 1,000-year storm looks like. So that's a lot of what we are seeing now is really extreme weather events. When you're experiencing heat events, they're going to be extreme. When you're going to see wildfire, it's going to be really extreme. A couple of statistics for you all. Just in the United States in 2023, we had 28 weather and climate events last year, which costed us about $92 billion. And this was higher than the number from 2022 as well.
Yep.
But if you zoom in more into just Santa Clara County, we've seen the atmospheric river that we had in 2020 and 2023, that costed us about 15 million in damage costs as well. We had the SCU lightning fire 2020, 160,000 acres of wildfire or land that burned as well. We had the heat event of 2022 where temperatures in San Jose reached 109 degrees. We also had some fatalities as a result of that. So I would say there's a lot more work to be done because the pace at which this is happening, we had not projected this.
Yes.
That is, I think, the point I want to make is we are clearly at a tipping point right now, and whatever action we can take to slow things down is going to be very important.
Okay, so talk to us from the standpoint of organizing as a region, mobilizing as a region. What do we need to be doing that we're not?
Absolutely. So again, I try to find a balance between painting a grave picture, but
Yes.
also leaving you all with hope and where action is needed. So I'm hoping I'm doing that successfully. That's the important thing as well. Again, I wanted to leave you all with some specific numbers for Santa Clara County, and this, of course, I know exists for San Mateo as well, but this is what I wanted to share with you all. Most of what you're seeing here, we're already way past it. If it says we're going to experience 13 heat days by 2020, just last year we had 20 heat days. So that's the point I was making. We are way past a lot of this. Action is happening. I don't want it to seem like action is not happening. We've seen the cost of solar go down, right? EVs are getting more and more affordable as well. Measures to electrify our homes. The technology is getting better. I think we have to remember that technology is not the sole answer. It is not going to get us there.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Because this is a valley of technology geeks and a valley of early adopters. And I think we put faith in technology. We think, actually, the thing that will solve this is some super duper thing that's still in our imagination, but it's out there.
It will,
Yeah.
but it's how we apply it and implement it.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So I think I kind of want to make 3 points or
Please.
three takeaways for today.
Please.
One is that we've already seen a lot of the equity-related measures on how our, the really vulnerable population is impacted. Climate change is a stress multiplier. We've already heard about people are food insecure. There's a housing affordability crisis. They're definitely lagging behind on health outcomes, jobs, income, many of those outcomes. You throw climate change in on there, and those layers are just going to add up on how stressed they personally become as individuals and their households as well. So I think that's the one point. So any program or technology that we put out, it really has to take into consideration how will this be accessible to that population group. We're not doing that yet. We often are not designing keeping them in mind. We're not designing our programs. It's usually an afterthought, unfortunately. We will launch some technology, we'll talk about building electrification, and then it's an afterthought of how do I make this accessible to someone who's low income, someone who's a renter, someone who's living in multi-family house? I think we need to flip the way we operate. If we were designing programs truly for that population group, I guarantee you that program will work for everyone else as well. So I think that's one takeaway I want you all to have.
Yes.
Thank you. The other one, Leslie was speaking to this, systems change.
Yes.
So a little bit about governance and systems change. Climate change does not stop at jurisdictional boundaries. Whether I'm from the county, I'm from the city, I'm from the neighboring county, it's not going to make a difference. And the intersectionality of the issue, how it touches every sector and every area, we really need to think about how do we break down those silos, how do we bring these different players together to do some of the work. So I think governance is really something that we have to think about, and how we coordinate and collaborate across all these different areas as well.
What do you think? What would be the ideal governance? If you were creating it, if it was purpose-built?
I'm from the county, so there's a general bias there. I have to say that.
Supervisor Ellenberg, she likes that.
I can speak from my experience, and I'll share one example as well. But for us, it seems, because I work at the county, that's kind of a manageable scale, but it's also then how do you partner with your neighboring counties, because we're a 9-county Bay Area as well. So again, it's my lens on how we're approaching some of the work. But I wanted to touch on systems change a little bit, because you spoke to transit, you spoke to some things.
Yes.
I think right now we're putting a lot of burden and emphasis on individuals making the right choice. So I wanted to touch on that is we're asking, you need to bike more. You need to take the train. You need to recycle. You need to buy local. Yes, you do. But the system is not supporting it or making it easier for us to do that. So if it was, I guess the question I always ask people is, if it was cheaper, faster, safer, easier to ride the train, why wouldn't we do that? We would. It's not right now, right? Like I literally took a trip to San Francisco the other day, and unfortunately, Caltrain was going to take me an hour and a half or 2 hours.
That's true.
And driving down was going to take me 50 minutes. So we really need to think about how do we change the system and really make the right policies and the right regulations, but make things happen at a systemic level.
Hard work ahead.
Absolutely. And maybe there's one last point I want to make about the role of public, private, and philanthropy in all of this. Again, the 3 work in silos. And what we are finding in our work is that, yes, government plays a role. We put in policies, we put in regulations. We want the private sector to innovate. We want them to scale solutions. And philanthropy really steps in and supports those lasting social change aspects that we need as well. But I think where we're finding this is that climate change is not a typical issue. It is really what we call a wicked societal problem, and it is going to have to require us to rethink how we all operate as different players in this field. So I think we're really going to need some new, what we call funding and financing ways of getting this work done. These solutions are not cheap. There is not enough money out there. Yes, there is state and federal funding. We always try and apply for those. It's not sustainable. So what we're really trying to think about is what could a funding mechanism look like that brings all these sectors together? We've got the funding there, but can we pool our resources? Can we come together for the greater good and more collective action? And we are trying to do some of that. So I wanted to make a little plug if you haven't heard. We do have a county climate collaborative that we've launched. And through this, we are exploring the idea of a resilience fund. The purpose really is to start to pool our investments across all these 3 sectors and really identify community projects, projects in these areas where we know they're really going to be impacted. How do we help them move forward with some of these solutions? So the collaborative is really, it's a network of public agencies, nonprofits, community organizations, the business sector, and academia. And I guess I'll leave you all with the thought that it is truly going to take all of us to solve this problem. And if you want to talk to me more about the Resilience Fund idea, please come and find me.
We know where you live.
Yes.
Yes. We are so fortunate to have a person like Jasneet in party and influence. Thank you, Jasneet. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes your second briefing today.